May 1943, Camp Concordia, Kansas. Obergefreiter Hans Schmidt stood in line outside the camp canteen, American scrip in his hand. 80 cents. That's what he'd earned this week picking cotton in the Kansas fields under guard. The guard tower loomed behind him, but the line moved peacefully forward. Men chatted in German about what they'd buy, cigarettes mostly, and chocolate if any remained. Schmidt had been a prisoner for 3 months since his capture in North Africa, and this weekly ritual at the canteen had become the most anticipated event of his captivity. The man behind him, Unteroffizier Wolfgang Becker, laughed at something another prisoner said. "In Tunisia, we had nothing," Becker said. "Here they pay us to work and let us buy American cigarettes. The Führer would have a fit if he knew." Feldwebel Ernst Lehmann, the ranking NCO in their barracks, shot them both a warning look. "Careful," he muttered, though without much conviction. 3 months in American captivity had taught all of them that the war's propaganda bore little resemblance to their reality. What none of them fully understood as they waited to spend their small wages was that they were participants in one of World War II's most peculiar economic experiments. By 1945, over 425,000 German POWs would labor on American farms, in factories, and on infrastructure projects, all while receiving wages that they could spend in camp canteens stocked with American goods. The program would generate millions of dollars in labor value, while maintaining Geneva Convention standards that many prisoners found shockingly generous compared to their expectations. The economics were stranger than any of them realized. The United States paid these enemy soldiers, fed them the same rations as American troops, housed them in camps that often exceeded the living standards they'd known in Germany, and created an internal economy that kept them occupied and cooperative. The mathematics of war had produced an unexpected equation. Treating prisoners humanely was not just morally correct but practically effective. The legal framework. The Geneva Convention of 1929 established clear rules for prisoner of war treatment. Article 27 specifically addressed labor and compensation. Belligerents may utilize the labor of able-bodied prisoners of war, according to their rank and aptitude. However, if officers or persons of equivalent status ask for suitable work, it shall be found for them so far as possible. Non-commissioned officers who are prisoners of war may be compelled to undertake only supervisory work, unless they expressly request remunerative occupation. More importantly for the American program, Article 34 stipulated, prisoners of war shall not receive pay for work in connection with the administration, internal arrangement, and maintenance of camps. Prisoners employed on other work shall be entitled to a rate of pay, to be fixed by agreements between the belligerents. These agreements shall also specify the portion which may be retained by the camp administration, the amount which shall belong to the prisoner of war, and the manner in which this amount shall be placed at his disposal during the period of his captivity. The United States War Department took these obligations seriously. In 1942, as the first significant numbers of German prisoners began arriving from North Africa, the Provost Marshal General's office established detailed regulations. German POWs would receive 80 cents per day for labor, the same rate paid to American privates for similar work details, minus the cost of their rations and housing. This wage structure was calculated precisely, 80 cents daily, paid in canteen coupons rather than currency. The legal architecture extended beyond wages. The War Department specified that POWs could not be forced into work directly supporting the American war effort against Germany. They couldn't manufacture ammunition or weapons. They couldn't work in shipyards building naval vessels. They couldn't be employed in any capacity that violated their technical non-combatant status. Instead, they would labor in agriculture, forestry, food processing, and other civilian industries suffering acute labor shortages as American men deployed overseas. By 1943, the system had crystallized into bureaucratic routine. Each camp maintained detailed pay records. Every prisoner who worked received credit. The Army deducted costs for rations and incidentals, then issued the remainder in canteen coupons, scrip that could only be spent at camp stores. The coupons came in denominations of 5, 10, and 25 cents, printed on cardstock and stamped with prisoner of war and the camp designation. Prisoners accumulated these coupons weekly, creating a small internal economy within the barbed wire. Camp Concordia, a typical installation. Camp Concordia, Kansas, opened in 1943 on land that had been a civilian conservation corps camp. The facility sprawled across 300 acres of flat Kansas prairie, housing 4,000 German prisoners at its peak. The camp consisted of 60 barracks, each housing 66 men, arranged in neat rows with military precision. Guard towers stood at each corner, though escapes were rare. Where would a German soldier go in the middle of Kansas? The canteen at Concordia occupied a converted warehouse near the camp's administrative center. Inside, shelves stocked items that astonished many prisoners when they first saw them. Coca-Cola, Hershey bars, Lucky Strike cigarettes, Gillette razor blades, Colgate toothpaste, playing cards, writing paper, pencils, harmonicas, and various toiletries. The Red Cross supplemented these with books, musical instruments, and sports equipment. Prices reflected retail costs, with cigarettes at 15 cents per pack, candy bars at 5 cents, and Coca-Cola at 5 cents per bottle. Hans Schmidt's first visit to the Concordia canteen had stunned him. In Tunisia, his unit had subsisted on increasingly meager rations: black bread, ersatz coffee, and occasional thin stews. Here, the canteen sold chocolate, real chocolate, not the sawdust mixed substitute he'd known in Germany. American cigarettes, not the harsh Turkish tobacco. Even beer, though it was the watery 3.2% near beer that disappointed most Germans. The weekly pay parade became a ritual. On Saturday mornings, prisoners lined up by barracks to receive their canteen coupons. Camp administrators called each name, verified work hours from meticulously maintained logs, calculated deductions, and distributed scrip. A prisoner who'd worked 6 full days received $4.80 in coupons, minus 50 cents for incidentals, $4.30 to spend. Those who'd worked half days, perhaps due to weather or reduced agricultural demand, received proportionally less. Wolfgang Becker typically earned about $4 weekly. He worked in the camp vegetable garden, an easy detail that kept him close to the compound rather than trucked out to surrounding farms. His routine was predictable. Morning formation, breakfast, work from 800 to 1200, lunch, work from 1300 to 1700, dinner, then free time. Saturdays brought pay and canteen access. Sundays were rest days, with church services for those who wanted them and recreational time for everyone. The canteen opened 3 times weekly: Wednesday evening, Saturday afternoon, and Sunday afternoon. Prisoners entered in groups, browsing the shelves like shoppers at any small-town store. A German prisoner detailed as assistant manager helped American guards oversee transactions. The assistant manager, usually someone who spoke English, maintained inventory and prevented disputes. Most purchases were straightforward. Cigarettes dominated sales, followed by candy and toiletries. Ernst Lehmann, the Feldwebel, earned slightly more because he supervised work details. His 80 cents daily accumulated to $5.60 weekly, and he rarely spent more than $2. He saved the remainder, accumulating canteen coupons that he kept in a wooden box under his bunk. By summer 1944, Lehmann had saved nearly $40 in scrip, money that theoretically could be converted to actual currency after repatriation, though most prisoners doubted they'd ever see those conversions. The agricultural labor system. The primary purpose of POW labor in America was agricultural. By 1943, farm labor shortages had reached crisis levels. Millions of young men had joined the military. Women had taken factory jobs. Farmers faced crops rotting in fields for lack of hands to harvest them. The War Manpower Commission calculated that American agriculture needed an additional 3 million workers to maintain production levels necessary to feed both the domestic population and Allied forces overseas. German POWs filled part of this gap. From camps scattered across the country, prisoners were trucked to farms daily during planting and harvest seasons. In Kansas, they picked cotton, wheat, and sugar beets. In Texas, they harvested cotton and worked in food processing plants. In Florida, they cut sugar cane. In California, they picked fruit. In Idaho, they dug potatoes. Every agricultural region with a nearby POW camp utilized prisoner labor. The logistics were complex. Each morning, trucks arrived at camps to transport prisoners to farms. American guards accompanied each group, typically 1 guard for every 10 prisoners, though ratios varied by location and perceived security needs. Prisoners worked 8-hour days with breaks for lunch. Farmers paid the army for this labor at prevailing wage rates, usually about $4 per prisoner per day. The army kept most of this money to offset the cost of maintaining camps. then distributed the 80-cent daily wage to prisoners. Hans Schmidt's work detail involved cotton picking on farms surrounding Concordia. Each morning at 600, he and 60 other prisoners loaded onto 2 trucks. They drove 15 miles to large commercial farms where endless rows of cotton stretched to the horizon. American guards established a perimeter, then prisoners spread across the fields with canvas sacks. By 1700, trucks returned them to camp. Schmidt found the work tedious but not unbearable. Kansas summer heat was brutal, but the routine was predictable and the alternative was sitting in camp doing nothing. The agricultural work created unexpected dynamics. Some farmers developed relationships with their prisoner laborers, particularly those who returned to the same farm repeatedly. Language barriers limited conversation, but gestures and broken English facilitated basic communication. A few farmers, particularly those of German descent in places like Kansas and Missouri, spoke enough German to converse more freely. These interactions sometimes evolved into something approaching friendliness, though guards discouraged fraternization. Productivity varied considerably. Motivated prisoners worked efficiently, meeting or exceeding expected output. Others worked slowly, engaging in what they called passive resistance, doing just enough to avoid punishment but not enough to genuinely help the American war effort. Camp commanders addressed this through pay incentives. Prisoners who exceeded work quotas received bonuses. Those who deliberately underperformed had their wages reduced or their canteen privileges suspended. By 1944, the program had expanded dramatically. Over 425,000 German POWs were scattered across 511 main camps and thousands of branch camps. They harvested crops worth millions of dollars. In Texas alone, German prisoners picked cotton that produced fabric for millions of army uniforms. In Louisiana, they cut timber that became crates for shipping war materiel to Europe. In Georgia, they harvested peanuts that became peanut butter for soldiers' rations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. German soldiers were helping feed and supply the armies fighting Germany. The canteen economy. The canteen system created a microcosm of consumer capitalism inside barbed wire. Prisoners accumulated wages and made purchasing decisions. Supply and demand governed availability. Inflation didn't exist because prices were fixed, but scarcity created informal markets. Popular items sold out quickly, creating winners and losers based on timing and luck. Cigarettes served as de facto currency. A prisoner who didn't smoke could trade his cigarettes for other goods or services. The exchange rate stabilized around simple ratios. 1 pack of Lucky Strikes equaled 3 candy bars or 1 bottle of Coca-Cola. Prisoners who accumulated cigarettes wielded disproportionate economic power within the compound. They could hire other prisoners to wash clothes, clean barracks, or perform other personal services, paying in cigarettes rather than scrip. Wolfgang Becker discovered this informal economy quickly. He didn't smoke, so his 15-cent cigarette purchases became trading stock. He'd buy 4 packs weekly, 60 cents of his $4 income, then trade them for services and goods. Another prisoner shined his boots daily for 2 cigarettes weekly. Someone else did his laundry for 3 cigarettes. Becker maintained his uniforms and personal area immaculately while doing minimal work himself, all through cigarette-mediated transactions. The canteen also stocked items beyond consumables. Prisoners could buy musical instruments, harmonicas for 50 cents, guitars for $3, accordions for $8. They bought art supplies, sports equipment, and hobby materials. Some camps allowed prisoners to special order items through catalogs, though this required accumulating significant scrip and navigating bureaucratic approval processes. Reading material dominated many prisoners' purchases. The canteen stocked German-language books, newspapers, and magazines. The Red Cross provided these at cost or free, but demand exceeded supply. Prisoners bought whatever was available, then traded books among themselves, creating lending libraries within barracks. Technical books were particularly valuable: engineering texts, agricultural manuals, language instruction. Many prisoners used captivity to educate themselves, spending evenings studying by barracks lights. Ernst Lehmann's savings strategy reflected long-term thinking unusual among prisoners. Most spent their wages weekly, buying cigarettes, candy, and immediate consumables. Lehmann bought only necessities: soap, razor blades, writing paper, and banked the rest. He maintained a ledger documenting every cent, recording income and expenditures with Prussian precision. His goal was accumulating enough to purchase major items if they became available, or to have significant savings if the army ever converted scrip to dollars. The psychological impact of the canteen system was profound. Having money, making purchasing decisions, and controlling small aspects of their lives gave prisoners agency they'd otherwise lack. Captivity stripped away freedom, but the canteen restored minuscule sovereignty. A prisoner couldn't leave the compound, couldn't contact family except through censored letters, couldn't determine his daily schedule. But he could decide whether to buy Lucky Strikes or Camels, whether to splurge on chocolate or save for a harmonica. These tiny freedoms mattered immensely. Daily life and routine. Life at Camp Concordia followed military rhythms that German prisoners found familiar. Wake up at 600, formation for count, breakfast at 700, work details departing at 800. Those not assigned to external work performed camp maintenance, cleaning barracks, maintaining grounds, working in kitchens or workshops. The camp operated as a self-contained town, with prisoners filling most positions except command and security. Meals replicated American military rations. Breakfast included eggs, bacon, bread, butter, coffee, and fruit. Lunch featured sandwiches, soup, and vegetables. Dinner offered meat, potatoes, vegetables, bread, and dessert. Portions matched what American soldiers received, generous by German wartime standards. Many prisoners gained weight in captivity, a phenomenon that shocked them given their expectations of prisoner treatment. Hans Schmidt wrote letters home describing the food, but censors rejected them. Mentioning specific meals violated regulations against revealing details about camp conditions. Only generic references were permitted. "We are treated well. Food is adequate. Do not worry about me." Schmidt's letters home focused on reassuring family rather than describing his reality. He couldn't write that he ate better in Kansas captivity than he'd eaten in Tunisia combat. That would violate both censorship rules and his own pride. Free time filled evenings and Sundays. Prisoners played soccer on makeshift fields, organized volleyball tournaments, performed theatrical productions, and formed musical groups. Many camps had orchestras composed entirely of prisoners, performing classical concerts for fellow POWs. Athletic competitions became serious affairs, with barracks competing against each other in various sports. Some camps even hosted boxing matches, though these required careful supervision to prevent scores settling. Wolfgang Becker played guitar in an informal band that performed weekend evenings. He'd bought his guitar from the canteen for $3, saved over 6 weeks, and taught himself to play using a borrowed instruction book. The band consisted of 6 prisoners with various instruments, playing German folk songs and popular tunes from memory. These performances drew crowds of homesick men who sang along, briefly forgetting their circumstances. Education programs supplemented recreation. The YMCA and Red Cross provided correspondence courses in various subjects. Prisoners could study languages, mathematics, engineering, agriculture, or business. Some camps offered formal classes taught by educated prisoners. Ernst Lehmann taught basic English to fellow prisoners, preparing them for possible interactions with Americans or for post-war opportunities. His classes met 3 evenings weekly, with 30 regular students working through textbooks provided by the Red Cross. Religious services accommodated both Protestant and Catholic prisoners. Chaplains visited camps regularly, though not all camps had permanent clergy. Prisoners organized their own services, with laymen leading prayers and Bible studies. Christmas and Easter became major events, with special meals and religious observances that provided comfort and continuity with home traditions. The camp newspaper, printed in German with American oversight, provided information and entertainment. It published work schedules, camp announcements, sports scores, and prison-writ articles. American authorities censored content, removing anything deemed propagandistic or harmful to morale. The newspaper couldn't advocate for Germany, criticize America, or spread defeatism. Within those boundaries, it provided an outlet for creative prisoners and information for everyone. Escapes and security. Despite the relatively comfortable conditions, some prisoners attempted escape. Between 1942 and 1945, over 2,000 escape attempts occurred from American POW camps, though fewer than 100 succeeded in remaining at large for more than a few days. The vast majority of prisoners never attempted escape, recognizing both its futility and the relative comfort of captivity. Camp Concordia experienced 7 escape attempts during its operation. 5 involved single prisoners who disappeared from work details and were recaptured within 48 hours. 1 involved 3 prisoners who dug a tunnel from their barracks, emerging outside the fence late at night. Guards discovered them missing at morning count, and all 3 were captured by police within 3 days, walking along rural Kansas roads. The 7th attempt succeeded temporarily. A prisoner named Kurt Fisher walked away from a farm work detail, acquired civilian clothes somehow, and reached Missouri before being arrested 2 weeks later trying to board a bus to Chicago. The punishment for attempted escape was typically 30 days in solitary confinement on reduced rations, followed by transfer to a maximum security camp. The Army operated several high-security facilities specifically for prisoners deemed escape risks or disciplinary problems. Alva, Oklahoma, housed the most troublesome Germans, hardcore Nazis, escape artists, and those who'd assaulted guards or fellow prisoners. Security at camps like Concordia was significant but not oppressive. Guard towers stood at corners, manned 24 hours daily. Fences consisted of multiple strands of barbed wire 10 feet high, with regular patrols between inner and outer perimeters. Guards carried rifles but rarely used them. The standing order was to challenge escapees verbally, fire warning shots, then aim to wound rather than kill if absolutely necessary. No prisoners were killed attempting escape from Camp Concordia, though several were wounded at other installations. The psychological barrier to escape exceeded the physical one. Where would a German prisoner go in Kansas? He spoke limited English at best, had no money, possessed no identification, and would be immediately identifiable by accent and appearance. Even if he reached a major city, then what? Cross an ocean to reach Germany? The implausibility kept most prisoners from even considering escape seriously. Hans Schmidt thought about escape occasionally, but never seriously. The idea appealed abstractly, to be free to return home to rejoin the war. But practically it made no sense. He'd be recaptured quickly, suffer punishment, and worsen his conditions for no gain. Better to accept captivity, work for small wages, spend Saturday afternoons at the canteen buying cigarettes and chocolate. The war would end eventually. Until then, Kansas wasn't a terrible place to wait. The broader impact. By war's end in 1945, German POWs had contributed enormously to American agricultural and industrial output. They'd harvested crops, processed food, built infrastructure, and filled labor gaps that would otherwise have crippled certain sectors. The economic value of their labor exceeded $200 million, equivalent to several billion dollars in modern terms. This wasn't slave labor. It was compensated work under international law, though the compensation was minimal and the workers had no choice about participating. The canteen system and wage structure served multiple purposes beyond Geneva Convention compliance. They kept prisoners occupied and cooperative. Busy prisoners with small luxuries caused fewer discipline problems than idle, resentful prisoners with nothing to lose. The economic incentives encouraged productivity. Prisoners who worked harder earned more and could buy more. The system created what behavioral economists might now call positive reinforcement mechanisms that aligned prisoner interests with American agricultural needs. Some prisoners used their canteen savings to purchase significant items. A few accumulated enough scrip to buy high-quality musical instruments, extensive book collections, or even bicycles that they could use around camp. Others saved everything, hoping for post-war conversion to currency. The Army promised that savings would be converted to dollars and paid after repatriation, though the actual mechanics remained vague. Wolfgang Becker spent nearly everything he earned. By 1945, he'd purchased cigarettes that he'd traded for services, bought a guitar and multiple harmonicas, accumulated a small library of books, and regularly consumed candy and Coca-Cola. His attitude was simple. We're prisoners. Who knows what happens after the war? I'd rather enjoy small pleasures now than save money that might never materialize. Many prisoners shared this philosophy, living day to day and spending their wages on immediate gratification. Ernst Lehmann's savings eventually exceeded $60 in scrip, a small fortune by POW standards. He maintained his ledger meticulously, documenting every transaction. His barracks mates teased him about hoarding, but Lehmann remained focused. After the war, this money could help me start over, he'd explain. Germany will be devastated. These dollars could mean the difference between survival and starvation. His long-term thinking reflected both pragmatism and hope that life would continue after captivity. Repatriation and aftermath. Germany surrendered in May 1945, but repatriation took months. The logistics of returning over 400,000 prisoners to a devastated Germany overwhelmed available shipping. Many prisoners remained in American camps through 1946, continuing to work and earn wages. Some welcomed the delay. Germany was starving, bombed to rubble, occupied by four powers. America, even behind barbed wire, offered better conditions than free Germany in 1945-46. Hans Schmidt returned to Germany in January 1946. The army converted his accumulated canteen savings, about $22, into marks at official exchange rates. He returned to Hamburg to find his neighborhood destroyed, his family evacuated to relatives in Bavaria, and the economy in collapse. The marks he'd received for his scrip bought little in the black market economy that dominated post-war Germany. His real wealth from captivity was weight. He'd gained 20 pounds in Kansas and health. He'd survived the war physically intact, which many of his comrades hadn't. Wolfgang Becker reached Germany in February 1946 with almost no savings. He'd spent everything at the canteen. But he brought his guitar, 3 harmonicas, a collection of American records he'd acquired somehow, and fluent English learned from guards and classes. He settled in Frankfurt and eventually opened a music shop, teaching guitar to children of American occupation personnel. His English and American musical knowledge became his post-war fortune, worth more than any scrip savings. Ernst Lehmann's carefully accumulated $60 converted to marks that briefly seemed valuable. He used them to purchase black market food for his family in the immediate post-war months. By late 1946, inflation had rendered the marks nearly worthless, but they'd served their purpose, keeping his family fed during the worst period. His American captivity had saved both his life and, indirectly through his savings, his family's survival through the immediate post-war catastrophe. The historical significance. The German POW wage and canteen system represented a peculiar intersection of international law, wartime pragmatism, and American abundance. The United States could afford to treat prisoners generously because industrial capacity allowed it. American farms and factories needed labor, and prisoners provided it. Paying them small wages and allowing canteen purchases kept them cooperative and productive while maintaining legal compliance with Geneva Conventions. The system contrasted sharply with other nations' treatment of POWs. German treatment of Soviet prisoners involved systematic starvation and abuse. Japanese treatment of Allied prisoners was horrific. Even Soviet treatment of German prisoners, both during and after the war, involved mass death from malnutrition, overwork, and disease. American camps weren't perfect. Abuse occurred, conditions varied, some prisoners suffered. But the overall treatment was remarkably humane by wartime standards. The canteen economy seems trivial in retrospect, prisoners buying cigarettes and chocolate while global war raged. But these small transactions mattered immensely to individuals experiencing them. The ability to make choices, to save or spend, to improve conditions marginally through labor and purchasing decisions. These tiny freedoms preserved humanity in circumstances designed to strip it away. A prisoner couldn't control his imprisonment, but he could decide whether to buy Lucky Strikes or Camels, and that small sovereignty mattered. The program also revealed American assumptions about how the world should function. Even enemy soldiers deserved fair treatment, basic comforts, and small economic freedoms. The Geneva Conventions required much of this, but American implementation exceeded minimum requirements. Canteens stocked luxuries, not just necessities. Wages, though minimal, were paid promptly and recorded meticulously. Recreation facilities exceeded what treaties mandated. This reflected both legal compliance and cultural values, American beliefs about human dignity, even for enemies. Conclusion. The story of German POWs receiving wages and spending them at camp canteens illuminates a fascinating corner of World War II history. It shows how international law functioned during total war, how economic incentives shaped prisoner behavior, and how small mercies preserved humanity in inhumane circumstances. The prisoners who stood in line at Camp Concordia's canteen, American scrip in hand, were participants in a system that treated them as human beings with basic economic agency, even while holding them as defeated enemies. For Hans Schmidt, Wolfgang Becker, Ernst Lehmann, and thousands of others, the weekly canteen visit became the highlight of captivity. It represented choice, control, and small pleasures in circumstances otherwise defined by powerlessness. The 80 cents they earned daily, the scrip they accumulated, the cigarettes and chocolate they purchased, these seemed trivial against the backdrop of global conflict that killed millions. But to individuals living day to day in Kansas prairie camps, these small transactions were life itself, tiny moments of normalcy in an abnormal world. The mathematics of the program were stark. America paid enemy soldiers to work, fed them abundantly, housed them adequately, and allowed them to purchase luxuries while German cities burned and German civilians starved. The contrast between captivity in Kansas and freedom in Germany became increasingly apparent as the war progressed. Many prisoners recognized the irony. They'd never lived better than when held as enemy captives by the nation they'd fought. This realization sometimes created cognitive dissonance, challenging propaganda about American weakness and German superiority. The lesson, if there is one, extends beyond World War II. Treating even enemies with basic humanity isn't just morally correct, it's practically effective. The German prisoners who worked American farms were productive partly because they were fed, paid, and given small freedoms. The canteen system cost little but generated cooperation and productivity worth millions. Kindness, even calculated kindness motivated by pragmatism rather than altruism, produces better outcomes than cruelty. In the end, the story of German POWs buying cigarettes at camp canteens with wages earned picking Kansas cotton is a story about humanity persisting in wartime, about systems designed to preserve dignity even in captivity, and about how small economic freedoms mattered immensely to individuals who'd lost everything else. It's a reminder that even in war's worst moments, people remain people, making small choices about how to spend 80 cents on a Saturday afternoon in a prison camp 10,000 miles from home.